Years after abandoning them, a millionaire CEO cries upon seeing a single dad and his twin daughters in an unexpected reunion. Before we dive in, let's spread a wave of positivity. Drop a single word that sums up how you're feeling today. The leather seat of Samantha Cross's Tesla felt uncomfortably cold against her back as she glanced down at the $1 million contract spread across her lap. At 32, she ruled boardrooms with the same laser focus that had turned her from a nobody into a self-made empire. But today, something about being stuck in Fifth Avenue's relentless gridlock pulled her attention away from the endless columns of numbers. Through the tinted window, she spotted a small patch of green. Central Park, sprawling like an oasis in the heart of the city. And then she saw him. A man sat on a bench, his arm casually pushing a stroller back and forth while two identical blonde girls ran around, laughing and chasing pigeons. Her heart skipped a beat. It was David Miller. Even from a distance, Samantha recognized the shape of his shoulders, the familiar gesture of running his hand through his dark hair when he was lost in thought. It had been 5 years since she'd last seen him. 5 long years since she'd walked away from their shared apartment in Brooklyn without an explanation, leaving behind not just the engagement ring, but also 2 6-month-old babies who had needed more than she was ready to give. "Ma'am, the traffic's moving," her driver said, but Samantha barely heard him. Her eyes were fixed on David and the girls, Emma and Sophie. Her mind whispered their names as if they were prayers she'd forgotten how to say. They must have been around 5 years old now, with golden curls bouncing as they ran toward their father. One of them threw herself into his arms, while the other tugged at his jacket, chattering about something only children found fascinating. Samantha's heart tightened. She watched David's face soften as he listened to his daughters, his smile warm and genuine in a way she'd nearly forgotten existed. He hoisted one of them onto his shoulders while the other climbed up beside him, and for a moment, the scene before her looked so effortlessly perfect, so full of love, that it felt like watching through the window of a life she had abandoned. A life she never learned how to live. The car lurched forward as the traffic began to clear, but Samantha couldn't tear her eyes away from the window. For 5 years, she had told herself that walking away had been the right choice, that David was better off without her, that the girls would thrive without a mother who prioritized quarterly reports over bedtime stories. But seeing them now seeing David with the family she had left behind, something inside her cracked. The tears came, unexpected and hot against her skin. When was the last time she'd cried? When was the last time she'd felt anything other than the cold satisfaction of another successful deal? "Are you all right, Miss Cross?" her driver asked, his voice breaking through her thoughts, concern evident in his tone as he glanced back at her in the rearview mirror dots. Samantha quickly wiped her eyes, her reflection in the window showing a stranger, someone whose perfectly applied makeup couldn't conceal the raw vulnerability that flickered in her gaze. "Turn around," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the chaos of the city. "Go back to the park." But by the time they maneuvered through the traffic and circled back, the bench was empty. David and the girls were gone, vanished into the crowd of New Yorkers as if they had never been there at all. Samantha sat still for what felt like an eternity, staring at that empty bench. 20 minutes passed before she gave her driver the word to take her home. As the skyline of Manhattan blurred past, something inside her clicked. She had built her empire by never looking back, but now, seeing her past so clearly, she realized that she desperately wanted to find her way home. That night, sleep eluded her. Samantha paced the length of her penthouse, the city lights twinkling below like distant stars she had long stopped wishing upon. By dawn, her decision had been made with the same ruthless efficiency she applied to every business move. Need the best, she told Marcus Webb, Manhattan's most discreet private investigator, as she sat behind her mahogany desk. Money is no object. Webb, a former FBI agent with silver hair and eyes that seemed to know too much, raised an eyebrow. What exactly are we looking for, Miss Cross? David Miller. He lives in Brooklyn with twin daughters, Emma and Sophie. They're 5 years old. I need everything. Address, phone number, employment, daily routines, financial situation, everything. Within 48 hours, Webb delivered a manila folder so thick that it looked capable of rebuilding a life from scratch. Samantha's hands trembled as she opened it, and the first photo she saw made her heart stop. David looked older than she remembered, thinner, with lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes. His clothes, though clean, bore the unmistakable wear of someone stretching every dollar. The photographs showed him at a local elementary school. He was a teacher now, making just enough to cover rent for a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Park Slope. But it was the photos of him with Emma and Sophie that truly tore her apart. Every image radiated pure, undeniable love. David helping with homework at their kitchen table, the three of them sharing ice cream cones on their stoop. Bedtime stories read by lamplight in a room decorated with mismatched furniture but covered in the bright drawings of 2 little girls. He's raised them alone, Webb reported matter-of-factly. Never remarried. Barely dates. His entire world revolves around those girls. Samantha felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her as she stared at a photo of David pushing both girls on swings at a neighborhood playground. They were laughing. Happy. This was the life she had walked away from. This was the happiness she had convinced herself she didn't need. There's more, Webb continued, his tone shifting to something more serious. The financial records show significant medical expenses. Regular doctor visits, specialist consultations, prescription. Costs eating up most of his salary. Medical expenses? Samantha's head snapped up. For the girls? No, for him, Webb replied. David's been battling a medical condition for the past couple of years. Samantha's world felt like it was tilting on its axis. Night. She sat in her pristine living room, surrounded by awards and accolades that now felt hollow, holding David's phone number like a lifeline to a world she had abandoned, a world she still loved but had been too afraid to face. Tomorrow, she would make the call that would change everything. But it wasn't until she had stared at her phone for 3 hours, her fingers trembling, that she finally dialed. The call rang 4 times before David's voice, deeper than she remembered, finally answered. Hello. The single word almost broke her resolve. 5 years of silence between them felt like an ocean. David. Her voice cracked. It's Samantha. The silence that followed was deafening. Samantha could almost feel the shock radiating through the phone line from Brooklyn to Manhattan. Samantha, he finally said, his voice breaking. Jesus Christ. After 5 years. After 5 years, you just call me. Samantha felt the sting of his words, but she pushed forward. I know I hurt you. I know there's no excuse. But I was scared, David. I was 27, terrified of being responsible for 2 tiny lives. And you thought walking out was the solution. I thought you and the girls would be better off without me, she admitted, her voice raw. But I was wrong. The silence on the other end of the phone was thick with emotion. What do you want, Samantha? David's voice was strained. I want to see them. I want to try to make this right. He laughed bitterly. You can't just show up after 5 years and expect to play house. These are my daughters. I raised them. They're my daughters too, Samantha whispered. His voice turned icy. No, You gave up that right when you walked out that door. But she wouldn't give up. Please, she begged. Just one meeting. One chance to explain. The silence stretched, and for a moment Samantha feared he would hang up. Finally, David's voice came back, quieter now. One meeting, no kids. If you can convince me. You've changed. Maybe then ... And so, the meeting was set. 3 weeks later, David agreed to meet again. This time at the Bronx Zoo. Samantha arrived early, her heart pounding, her palms sweaty. This wasn't a business deal. This was everything. She found them at the penguin exhibit. David looking pale and unsteady, his hand gripping the railing tighter than usual. Emma and Sophie were pressed up against the glass, their faces filled with excitement. Sophie saw Samantha first and rushed over. Look, the penguins are having a party. Emma followed more slowly, smiling when she saw her. We've been here for an hour. Daddy needed to sit down a lot. Samantha's stomach tightened with worry, but she held it in. Should we go? See the lions next? She suggested, trying to keep the mood light. Sophie grabbed her hand, pulling her along, but Emma hung back, watching Samantha with the perceptiveness only a child could possess. You look familiar, Emma said quietly. Samantha's heart stopped. Emma's comment was innocent, but it struck deep. What had she missed over the years? What had she let go of? The visit to the zoo was filled with moments of pure joy. Moments she never thought she would experience again. But as she stood next to David, watching his girls laugh and play, the reality of everything she had lost hit her harder than ever. David, she asked quietly, sitting beside him as he watched his daughters. What's wrong with you medically? I mean, he stiffened, his jaw tightening. It's none of your concern. But those are my daughters watching you struggle, Samantha insisted, her voice firm despite the pain. It is absolutely my concern. The silence between them grew thick. Progressive muscular dystrophy. Adult onset. He finally whispered, his voice breaking. I've got maybe 10 good years left. Samantha's breath caught in her throat. My God, she whispered, her heart aching. How long have you known? 2 years, David said softly. I didn't tell anyone ... until now. The weight of the years, the weight of her abandonment, came crashing down on Samantha, and she knew, in that moment, that the road ahead would be a long one. But for the first time in 5 years, she wasn't running anymore. Started with muscle weakness, tremors, thought it was stress from single parenting. His laugh was bitter. Turns out stress doesn't cause degenerative muscle disease. What about treatment? There's experimental therapy, genetherapy trials, new medications. But insurance doesn't cover experimental, and even with my teacher's salary. He shrugged helplessly. How much, Samantha? How much does the treatment cost? It doesn't matter. I can't afford it. So, how much, David? He looked at her then, and she saw the defeat in his eyes. $15,000 a month minimum. Could be more depending on how I respond. $15,000. She spent more than that on business dinners some months. The solution was so simple it made her dizzy. Daddy, Sophie called from the exhibit. Come see this monkey, looks just like Mr. Peterson from next door. David struggled to his feet, and Samantha watched him force a smile for his daughters, their daughters. Even as his body betrayed him with every movement. We should head home soon, he told the girls. Daddy's getting tired. Can Samantha walk us to the subway? Emma asked. She makes you smile more. The observation, delivered with a child's innocent clarity, hung in the air between them. David did smile. More when she was around. Samantha had noticed it too. Despite everything, despite the year's offer and anger, There was still something between them, something worth fighting for. Walking to the subway, Samantha made a decision that would change everything. Again, Samantha couldn't sleep. For 3 days after the zoo visit, David's revelation consumed her thoughts. She'd built a fortune making, calculated risks, but this felt different. More personal than any business deal she'd ever negotiated. She found him Tuesday evening, waiting outside the girls' elementary school. Parents clustered in small groups, but David sat alone on a bench, looking exhausted. The other mothers gave him sympathetic smiles, clearly aware of his condition. "We need to talk," Samantha said, approaching him directly. He looked up startled. "Samantha, what are you doing about your treatment? About the $15,000 a month you can't afford while you're slowly dying. Keep your voice down," he hissed, glancing around at the other parents. "This isn't the place." "Then where is the place, David? When will you stop being too proud to let me help?" The school doors opened, releasing a flood of children. Emma and Sophie spotted them immediately, their faces lighting up with surprise and delight. "Samantha, Daddy, why didn't you tell us she was coming?" Sophie bounced between them excitedly. "It's a surprise visit," Samantha said smoothly. "I was hoping I could walk you home and talk to your daddy about something important." During the 6-block walk to their apartment, the girls chatted about their day while David remained pointedly silent. Samantha saw their building, a modest pre-war structure that had seen better decades, and felt another pang of guilt. This was what her choice had reduced them to. "Can you girls play in your room for a few minutes?" David asked once they were inside the small apartment. "Samantha and I need to talk." The apartment was tiny but immaculately clean. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator. Homework was neatly stacked on the kitchen table, and everything spoke of a father doing his absolute best with limited resources. "I know what you're going to say," David began once their girl's bedroom door closed. "And the answer is no. You haven't heard my offer." "I don't need to. You want to throw money at the problem because that's what you do. But I won't be your charity." "Case Samantha, I won't owe you anything else. This isn't charity." Her voice rose, then dropped as she remembered the girls could hear. "This is about Emma and Sophie having their father alive and healthy. Don't." His voice was deadly quiet. "Don't you dare use my daughters to manipulate me." "Our daughters," she corrected. "And not manipulating anyone. I'm offering to pay for your treatment because it's the right thing to do, right?" David laughed bitterly. "What's right would have been you staying 5 years ago. What's right would have been you being here when I got the diagnosis, when I spent nights terrified about what would happen to them if it did." The accusation hit home, but Samantha pressed on. "I can't change their past, but I can help with the future. Let me pay for the treatment, David. Let me do this one thing right." "And then what?" "You disappear again when you get bored. When being a family gets too complicated for your corporate lifestyle." "I'm not going anywhere." "You said that before. The night you proper said to me, you said we'd build a life together. The morning the girls were born, you held them and promised you'd never let anything hurt them. Your word doesn't mean much to me anymore." Each accusation was justified, each wound self-inflicted. Samantha had no defense except the truth. "I was different then. Scared, selfish, completely unprepared for the reality of parenthood. But seeing you with them, seeing what an amazing father you've become, seeing what I almost lost." She took a shaky breath. "I'm not the same person who walked out that door." "Prove it." "How?" "Stay. Not just for zoo visits and playground meetings. Stay and help me raise them. Be their mother, not just their rich benefactor." The challenge hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Everything she'd built, her entire identity as a corporate Powerhouse would have to be restructured around two little girls who barely knew her. If I do this, she said carefully, if I commit to being their mother, you let me pay for your treatment. No arguments, no wounded pride. This becomes a partnership. David studied her for a long moment. From the bedroom came the sound of Emma reading to Sophie. A routine that spoke of countless nights when he'd been too tired to manage bedtime. Stories himself. You'd really walk away from your company. I'd find a way to balance both. Work remotely. Delegate more. Restructure my priorities. But yes, if it came down to choosing, I'd choose them. Why should I believe you? Because I am asking you to let me prove it, instead of just expecting you to trust me. She met his eyes. Give me the Chancetto earn their love, and let me give you the chance to live long enough to see them grow up. Through the thin walls they could hear Sophie giggling at something Emma had read. The sound of their daughter's happiness filled the silence between them. Finally, David nodded. One chance, Samantha. You hurt them. You hurt me, and it's over forever. I understand. Treatment starts next weekend. You start being their mother every single day, not just when it's convenient. As she left that evening, Samantha realized she just made the biggest commitment of her life. Not to a business deal or a corporate merger, but to two little girls who deserved a mother who would never leave them again. The emergency board meeting convened at 6 a.m. sharp. Samantha's senior partners filled the mahogany conference room, their faces reflecting confident and barely concealed panic. In 15 years of building Cross Industries from a small consulting firm into a multi-billion-dollar empire, she had never called a meeting like this. Ladies and gentlemen, Samantha began standing at the head of the table she'd commanded for over a decade. Effective immediately, I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations. The room erupted. Richard Steinberg, her oldest partner, looked as if she'd announced the company's bankruptcy. Samantha, what are you talking about? The Morrison deal closes next week. The Singapore expansion will proceed as planned under your capable leadership. She interrupted calmly. I'm not abandoning the company. I'm restructuring my role. For how long? Asked Maria Santos, the CFO. Indefinitely. The silence that followed was deafening. These people had built their careers around her relentless drive, her singular focus on growth and profit. The woman who had once worked 18-hour days, who had never taken a vacation longer than 3 days, was effectively stepping away from everything she'd built. Is this a health issue? Richard asked quietly. You could say that. Samantha's voice softened. But not mine. Within hours the news leaked. By afternoon, financial blogs were speculating about hostile takeovers and corporate instability. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from investors, reporters, and concerned colleagues. She ignored them all. Instead, she stood in a cramped Park Slope apartment, watching David pack a small overnight bag for his first round of experimental treatment. Emma and Sophie sat on the couch, unusually quiet, as they absorbed the gravity of the situation. The treatment takes 3 days, David explained to them for the 3rd time. Samantha will stay with you while I'm gone. Will the medicine make you better, Daddy? Emma asked, her voice small. The doctors hope so, sweetheart. Sophie, ever the optimist, brightened. And Samantha will make us pancakes, like you do. We'll figure out pancakes together. Samantha promised, though she'd never made pancakes in her life. After David left for the hospital, the reality of her decision hit her. She was alone with 2 5-year-olds who barely knew her in an apartment, the size of her walk-in closet with no stuff, no assistant, and no idea how to manage the most important job she'd ever taken on. The first disaster struck at dinner. She'd ordered Thai food, forgetting that children's palates differed significantly from sophisticated adult tastes. Sophie took one bite of pad thai and made a face like she'd been poisoned. "It's too spicy," she wailed. "Daddy always makes mac and cheese." "I don't know how to make mac and cheese," Samantha admitted, feeling more helpless than she had in any boardroom negotiation. "From the box," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Blue box, orange powder." The next 2 hours were a crash course in domestic reality. Bernard mac and cheese was scraped from the pot. Bath time turned into a flood that soaked the bathroom floor. Bedtime mysteries required voices and sound effects she'd never practiced. Emma cried for her father. Sophie had a nightmare and crawled into Samantha's makeshift bed on the couch. Ding, midnight. With both girls finally asleep, Samantha sat in the small living room surrounded by the detritus of her first day as a mother. Her phone showed 47 missed calls and hundreds of unread emails. The business world was in crisis mode, demanding her attention. She turned the phone off. For the first time in 15 years, something mattered more than work. 2 little girls who needed her to be present, to be reliable, to be the mother she'd never learned how to be. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. It was exactly where she needed to be. Day 3 without David brought Samantha face to face with the morning routine from hell. Emma stood in the kitchen wearing one sock, her hair resembling a bird's nest, while Sophie sat at the table in her pajamas, systematically picking marshmallows out of her cereal. "We're going to be late for school," Samantha announced, checking her watch with the same anxiety she'd once reserved for missing board meetings. "Daddy always braids my hair," Emma said, holding up a hairbrush like it was a foreign object. "I don't know how to braid YouTube," Emma suggested with the wisdom of the digital generation. 20 minutes and 3 failed attempts later, Emma's hair was high, secured in what charitably could be called a ponytail. Sophie had dressed herself in striped leggings, a polka dot dress, and rain boots despite the sunny weather. "Is this what you want to wear?" Samantha asked diplomatically. "Daddy says I can wear whatever makes me happy," Sophie declared, twirling to show off her ensemble. The walk to school was a revelation. In chaos management, Emma worried aloud about whether her lunch was properly packed, while Sophie stopped every few feet to examine interesting sidewalk cracks. Other parents smiled sympathetically at Samantha's obvious bewilderment, recognizing the universal struggles of parenthood. Chen, Emma's teacher, approached them at the school gate. "You must be the family friend David mentioned. I'm so glad someone's helping while he's getting treatment." "Yes, I'm Samantha." Hesitated. What was she exactly? "I'm Samantha. Emma's been asking about her father. Perhaps you could reassure her." Samantha knelt to Emma's level, suddenly aware that every word mattered. "Daddy is getting medicine to make him stronger. He'll be home tomorrow, and the doctors are taking very good care of him." Emma nodded solemnly, but didn't look convinced. "Will you pick us up after school?" "I'll be right here at 3 o'clock. I promise." The promise felt weightier than any contract she'd ever signed. The afternoon pickup brought new challenges. Sophie bounded out of kindergarten covered in finger paint and playground dirt, while Emma emerged looking troubled. Madison asked why. "I don't have a real mom," Emma said quietly as they walked home. "I told her my mom went away, but she said that means she didn't love me enough to stay." Samantha's heart clenched. She stopped walking and knelt on the sidewalk, ignoring the other parents streaming past. "Emma, listen to me very carefully. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, really big, terrible mistakes. But that doesn't mean they don't love you. Sometimes it means they love you so much they don't know how to do it right. Did my real mom make a mistake?" The question hung in the air like a test Samantha wasn't prepared for. The truth was too complicated for a 5-year-old, but she couldn't lie either. "Yes, sweetheart. She made a very big mistake, that she's trying to fix it now." "How do you know?" "Because," Samantha said, her voice thick with emotion, She told me so. That evening, as she helped with homework at the kitchen table where David usually sat, Samantha realized she was learning more than how to be a mother. She was learning what she'd missed. Not just the first 5 years of her daughter's lives, but the simple joy of being needed, of mattering to someone in a way that had nothing to do with profit margins or strategic planning. Sophie fell asleep in her lap during story time. Emma Shilley asked if Samantha would check for monsters under her bed. These small victories felt more significant than any business triumph she'd ever achieved. Tomorrow, David would come home from his first treatment cycle. Tomorrow, she'd have to prove that her commitment was more than just good intentions. Tonight, she was simply a woman learning to be a mother. 2 weeks into David's treatment, the emergency call came at 2 a.m. His voice was weak, strained with pain, and she could hear even through the phone static. "Samantha, I need you to bring girls to Mountsea. There were complications with the treatment. I'm being admitted for observation." She found him in the emergency room, pale and connected to monitors that beeped ominously. Emma and Sophie, hastily dressed and clutching their favorite stuffed animals, stared at their father with wide, frightened eyes. "Daddy looks scary," Sophie whispered, pressing against Samantha's leg. "He's going to be okay," Samantha said, though her own voice trembled. "The doctors are taking very good care of him." The attending physician, Dr. Martinez, pulled her aside, while the girls climbed carefully onto David's hospital bed. "The experimental treatment sometimes causes severe muscle inflammation. We need to monitor him for at least 48 hours, possibly longer." "Is he in danger?" "Not immediately, but we need to be cautious." "Are you family?" The question caught her off guard. Legally, she was nothing to them, but watching Emma smooth David's hair while Sophie held his hand, she realized that family wasn't always about legal documents. "I'm their mother," she said quietly. "Do first night in the hospital was a revelation in vulnerability." David drifted in and out of medicated sleep while the girls refused to leave his side. Samantha found herself arranging 3 uncomfortable chairs into makeshift beds using her designer coat as a blanket for Sophie. "I'm scared," Emma confessed around midnight, her voice barely audible above the medical equipment's constant humming. "Me too," Samantha admitted, pulling both girls close. "But we're going to stay right here with Daddy. Okay? We're not going anywhere." Emma studied her face in the dim light. "Daddy said you went away before. Will you go away again if he gets sicker?" The question pierced straight through her carefully constructed defenses. "No, sweetheart. I'm never leaving you again. Not ever. Promise. I promise." By dawn, all 3 of them were asleep in the cramped chairs. Sophie curled in Samantha's lap, Emma's head on her shoulder, their small bodies trusting her with their safety. In a way that humbled her completely. David woke to find them that way. Despite his weakness, he smiled out of sight. "You stayed," he said quietly. "Of course I stayed. My girls didn't usually sleep for strangers." Samantha looked down at Emma and Sophie, still peaceful in sleep despite the hospital's harsh fluorescent lighting and constant noise. "I'm not a stranger anymore." The second night brought new challenges. Sophie developed a fever, probably from exhaustion and stress. Emma refused to eat anything from the hospital cafeteria. David grew increasingly agitated, worried about his daughters' well-being while unable to care for them himself. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he told Samantha during one of his lucid moments. "They shouldn't have to see Mel like this. They shouldn't have to live with the uncertainty." "They're not living with uncertainty," Samantha replied, adjusting Sophie's makeshift blanket. "They're living with love." "There's a difference. What happens when the treatment doesn't work? What happens when I get worse? Then we face it together." All of us. Emma stirred in her chair, mumbling David's name. Samantha moved quietly to her side, stroking her hair until she settled back into sleep. You're different, David observed. The old Samantha would have hired a nanny to handle this. The old Samantha didn't understand that some things can't be delegated. When they finally returned home after David's 72-hour observation, something fundamental had changed. The girls no longer saw Samantha as their father's friend or a temporary carriager. They saw her as the person who had stayed with them through their scariest night, who had held them when they were afraid, who had promised never to leave. They saw her as their mother. 3 months had passed since Samantha first stepped back into their lives. The morning routine had become a second nature. Pancakes on weekends, school pickups, bedtime stories. But Emma had been watching, always watching, with the intensity of a child who understood more than adults gave her credit for. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. David was napping, exhausted from his latest treatment cycle, while Samantha helped the girls organize their art supplies. Emma sat cross-legged on the living room floor, studying a family photo David kept on the side table. Only of the few pictures. That included Samantha from before she left. This is you, Emma said suddenly, holding up the photo. It wasn't a question. Samantha's hand stood on that crayon box. Yes, that's me. You look younger, and you're holding us Asperbies. Sophie looked up from her coloring book, curious. Really? Let me see. Emma showed her sister the photo, pointing to Samantha's face. See, Samano's, same smile, and look, she's holding both of us. The moment Samantha had dreaded and anticipated for months had arrived with the quiet inevitability of truth. She sat down on the floor facing both girls, her heart hammering against her ribs. Emma, Sophie, there's something I need to tell you. David appeared in the doorway, awakened by the serious tone in her voice. He leaned against the frame, prepared to intervene if necessary, but ready to let her handle this moment. She'd earned the right to have. You're a real mommy, aren't you? Emma said, her voice matter-of-fact, despite the enormous weight of the question. Yes, sweetheart, I am. Sophie's eyes went wide. But where were you? Why weren't you here before? This was the hardest part. Explaining adult failures to children, who deserve simple truths without destroying their sense of security. When you were babies, I was very scared, Samantha began carefully. Being a mommy felt too big and too scary for me, so I made a terrible mistake. It went away. You left us. Emma's voice was small. Hurt, I did, and it was wrong. It was the worst thing I've ever done. But you came back, Sophie said, moving closer to Samantha with the forgiveness that came naturally to her generous heart. I came back because I realized that being scared is not a good reason to leave the people you love. I came back because I wanted to be your mommy the right way this time. Emma wasn't so easily satisfied. But what if you get scared again? What if you leave? The question hung in the air like a challenge. David watched from the doorway, and Samantha could feel his tension. This was theatres that mattered most. Not just convincing him of her commitment, but earning the trust of too little. Girlswoe had every reason to protect their hearts. I understand why you're worried, Samantha said. I broke your trust before you were even old enough to know what trust meant. But I promise you this. I will never ever leave you again. Even if I am scared, even if things get hard, I will always be here. How do we know you mean it? Emma asked, her mother's pragmatism showing through. Samantha thought of all the ways adults make promises to children. Empty reassurances, conditional love, good intentions that fade when life gets complicated. Instead, she offered the only thing that mattered. Because I love AO more than I love anything else in the world, more than my job, more than being comfortable, more than being safe. I love you enough to stay, even when staying is scary. Sophie launched herself into Samantha's arms with few wholehearted acceptance of a child who had decided to trust again. Emma hesitated longer, studying Samantha's face with eyes too old for her age. Finally, she asked the question that broke Samantha's heart. "Can I call you Mummy?" "I would love that more than anything," Samantha whispered, tears streaming down her face as Emma finally, carefully settled into her arms. From the doorway, David wiped his own eyes. The family he'd tried to hold together alone was finally truly whole. The word mommy didn't come easily at first. Sophie used it liberally, delighting in having a title for Samantha that matched her friends' mothers. Emma was more cautious, testing the word like a new flavor she wasn't sure she liked. But slowly, trust grew through small moments. When Emma had a nightmare about monsters, she called for Samantha instead of David. When Sophie's favorite doll lost an arm, she brought it to Mommy for fixing. These tiny victories felt more significant than any corporate achievement Samantha had ever earned. The real breakthrough came during a rainy Tuesday afternoon. David was at his weekly treatment appointment, and Samantha was attempting to help with homework at the kitchen table that had become their family headquarters. "I can't do it." Emma threw down her pencil in frustration, tears threatening over a math worksheet that seemed designed to teach 6-year-olds. "Hey, it's okay," Samantha said, moving her chair closer. "Let's figure it out together. Daddy's better at math. Daddy's better at lots of things, but I'm here now, and we're going to figure this out." 20 minutes later, Emma had solved the problems herself with minimal guidance. Her face lit up with pride. "I did it, Mommy. I did it." The words slipped out naturally without self-consciousness. Emma froze, realizing what she'd said. But Samantha simply smiled. "Yes, you did. I'm so proud of you." That evening, Samantha established a new tradition: pancakes for dinner whenever someone had a particularly good day. The girls giggled as she flipped pancakes with varying degrees of success. And David laughed from his spot at the table, looking healthier than he had in months. "These are terrible," Sophie announced cheerfully, syrup covering her face. "They're perfect," Emma corrected, meeting Samantha's eyes with a smile. Later, as Samantha tucked them into their beds, bunk beds David had built himself in their shared room, Emma grabbed her hand. "Mommy, are you happy you came back?" "Every single day," Samantha replied honestly. "Good, because we need you." In the living room afterward, David sat on their second-hand couch. Medical bills spread across the coffee table. The experimental treatment was working. His strength was returning gradually, but the financial strain remained enormous. "I found a way to work remotely more often," Samantha said, settling beside him. "I can be here for school pickups, sick days, everything in port. You don't have to sacrifice your career for us." "I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm choosing what matters most." David looked at her, really looked, and she saw the last walls of his resistance finally crumbling. "They love you," he said quietly. "I love them too, more than I ever thought possible, and us. What are we now?" It was the question they'd been dancing around for months. Samantha took his hand, feeling calluses from years of single parenthood. "We're a family," she said simply. "However complicated, however unconventional, we're a family." "Are you sure about this?" David asked for the third time as Samantha adjusted his tie. 6 months of treatment had restored color to his cheeks, though he still tired easily. "They're my parents, David. They have a right to meet their granddaughters." That dinner at Samantha's childhood home in Westchester was carefully orchestrated. Her parents, Margaret and James Cross, had built their own modest fortune in real estate. but their wealth palled compared to what their daughter had achieved. They'd been shocked by her sudden retreat from corporate life, bewildered by her explanation about family responsibilities. Emma and Sophie sat in the back of Samantha's car, dressed in their nicest clothes and slightly awed by the prospect of meeting grandparents they'd never known existed. "Will they like us?" Sophie asked as they pulled through the iron gates of the estate. "They're going to love you," Samantha promised, though her stomach churned with nerves. Margaret Cross opened the door, with the practiced smile of someone accustomed to entertaining, but her composure cracked the moment she saw the twins. Two blonde girls stared up at her with curious eyes, her granddaughters meeting her for the first time at age 6. "Oh my," she whispered, kneeling to their level. "You're even more beautiful than your pictures." James Cross appeared behind, his wife, his stern business demeanor melting as Emma Shilley offered him a drawing she'd made in the car. "This is for you, Grandpa." The word hit him like a physical blow. At 72, he'd never thought he'd hear it. Dinner transformed from a formal affair into chaos as the girls charmed their grandparents completely. Sophie regaled them with stories about kindergarten, while Emma quietly observed, warming gradually, Toffee's new adults who hung on their every word. "Daddy was very sick," Sophia announced over dessert, "but Mommy came back and helped make him better." Margaret's eyes met Samantha's across table. They'd spoken briefly about David's condition, but hearing it from Sophie gave it new weight. "Mommy came back," James asked gently. "She was lost for a while," Emma explained with 6-year-old logic. "But she found us again." Later, as the girls played in the garden where Samantha had once played, Margaret pulled her daughter aside. "I've never seen you like this," she said quietly. "You look peaceful." "I am. For the first time in my adult life, I'm exactly where I belong." "And David, are you?" "We're figuring it out day by day." James joined them on the terrace, David beside him. The two men had found common ground, discussing the girls' education and David's graduate recovery. "He's a good man," James said simply. "And those girls, very extraordinary." "They get that from their father," Samantha replied, watching David push both girls on the garden swing set. "No," Margaret said softly. "They get their strength from him, but their spirit. That's all you, sweetheart. Even when you were small, you had that same fierce determination." As they drove home that evening, Sophie fell asleep against David's shoulder, while Emma leaned against Samantha. "I like having grandparents," Emma murmured sleepily. "And they love having you," Samantha replied, realizing that she'd just given her daughters something she'd never thought to offer before. An extended family, roots that went deeper than their small apartment in Brooklyn. The circle was expanding, love multiplying in ways she'd never imagined possible. 6 months later, as autumn painted Central Park in shades of gold and crimson, Emma and Sophie's 6th birthday approached with the weight of significance none of them could ignore. It would be their first celebration as a complete family, a milestone that felt both joyous and bittersweet. Samantha threw herself into planning with the same intensity she'd once reserved for corporate acquisitions. She booked Theronbow room, hired a celebrity children's entertainer, and ordered a custom cake that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "It's too much," David said quietly, reviewing the guest list that included half of Manhattan's social elite, alongside the girls' kindergarten classmates. "It's their first real birthday party with both parents," Samantha defended. "I want it to be perfect." "Perfect for who? For them or for you?" The question stung because it held truth. Emma, ever observant, had been quieter than usual as the elaborate plans unfolded. Sophie seemed excited by the grandeur, but even she asked why they couldn't just have cake at home like last year. 3 days before the party, Emma climbed into Samantha's lap during their evening reading time. "Mommy, can I tell you a secret?" Of course, sweetheart. I don't want a big party. I just want you and Daddy and Sophie, and maybe Grandma and Grandpa, and maybe we could have a picnic in the park where you first saw us again. Samantha's throat tightened. You don't want the rainbow room, the magician, the pony rides? Emma shook her head solemnly. I just want us to be together like a real family. That night, after the girls were asleep, Samantha made a dozen phone calls, cancelling every elaborate arrangement she'd made. David found here on the couch surrounded by party planning debris and looking shell-shocked. What happened? Emma wants a picnic. Just family. I've been planning my fantasy of their perfect birthday instead of listening to what they actually wanted. David sat beside her, pulling her close. The old Samantha would never have changed course once she'd made a decision. The old Samantha wasn't very good at being a mother. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear. Central Park bustled with early autumn activity, as Samantha spread blankets on the grass near the bench where she'd first seen David with the girls almost a year ago. Margaret and James arrived with arms full of simple, thoughtful gifts, art, supplies. For Emma, building blocks for Sophie, books they could read together as a family. The birthday celebration was beautifully ordinary. They played hide and seek behind trees, fed ducks at the pond, and sang happy birthday over home-made chocolate cake that listed slightly to one side, but tasted like love. Make a wish. Samantha encouraged as the girls leaned over their shared cake, 6 candles flickering in the gentle breeze. Emma and Sophie exchanged a look. That twin telepathy that had developed over their 6 years together, and blew out the candles in perfectionism. What did you wish for? Margaret asked. Can't tell, or it won't come true, Sophie said solemnly. Other eyes sparkled with mischief. Later, as they packed up the picnic remnants, Emma tugged on Samantha's sleeve. Mommy, I can tell you my wish now because it already came true. Oh, what was it? I wish for us to be a real family forever. And we are, aren't we? You and Daddy, and me and Sophie. Samantha knelt to Emma's level. This serious little girl who had inherited her analytical mind, but David's generous heart. Yes, sweetheart, we're a real family. Even though you went away before, especially because I came back. Some families are born together, and some families choose each other. We did both. Sophie threw her arms around both of them, nearly knocking them over with her enthusiasm. Best birthday ever. As they walked home in the fading afternoon light, David carrying a sleepy Sophie, while Emma held Samantha's hand. They passed the bench where it had all started. Samantha paused, remembering the broken woman who had sat in that Tesla a year ago, watching a life she thought she'd never be worthy of claiming. Penny, for your thoughts? David asked. Just thinking about second chances, she replied. And how sometimes the best gifts are the ones we almost threw away. Emma squeezed her hand. Like you came back to us. Like I came back to you. The setting sun painted the park in golden light as they headed home. A real family, imperfect and complicated and absolutely complete. 1 year later, Saturday morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of their new apartment. Still in Brooklyn, but bigger now with separate rooms for Emma and Sophie, and a kitchen where they could all cook together. These sounds of domestic chaos filled the air. David humming off-key while flipping pancakes. Emma and Sophie arguing good-naturedly about which movie to watch later. The coffee maker gurgling its familiar morning symphony. Samantha stood in the doorway, still in her pajamas, watching the scene with wonder that hadn't faded. Even after 15 months of mornings like this, she'd learned to find magic in the mundane. Sticky fingers on clean counters, cereal crunching underfoot. The particular brand of exhaustion that came from loving people more than sleep. Mummy, tell Sophie that we watched Frozen yesterday. Emma called from the breakfast table, her hair still tousled from sleep. "We can watch it again," Samantha said diplomatically. "It's Saturday, movie marathon day." David caught her eye over Owie, the girls' heads, and smiled. The same gentle smile that had captured her heart 8 years ago, now deepened by shared struggles and hard-won happiness. His latest medical checkup had shown remarkable improvement. The experimental treatment, now fully covered and showing consistent results, had not only stopped the disease's progression, but actually restored much of his strength. "Corporate meeting this afternoon?" he asked, spatula in hand. Video conference from home. 2 hours max. She'd restructured her entire business model around being present for the moments that mattered. Cross-industry still thrived under her strategic guidance, that she'd learned the difference between being indispensable and being absent. "Can we make cookies while you work?" Sophie asked hopefully. "The ones with the sprinkles. As long as you don't burn down the kitchen," Samantha replied, earning delighted giggles. These were the victories she'd never thought to measure. Successful cookie baking, homework completed without tears, bedtime stories that ended with sleepy kisses instead of tantrums. Her definition of success had undergone a complete revolution. The afternoon brought its own rhythm. While Samantha conducted her business call from the makeshift office in their bedroom, she could hear David helping the girls with their weekend art project. Through the thin walls came bursts of laughter, gentle corrections, and the comfortable chaos of a family occupying the same space without needing to perform for each other. "The quarterly projections look excellent," Richard's voice crackled through her laptop speaker during the board meeting. "Though we still think you could increase profit significantly if you return to full-time operations." "I'm exactly where I need to be," Samantha replied, watching through her doorway as Emma showed David a drawing of their family. 4 stick figures, holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "My priorities have changed, and they're not changing." Back that evening, as she tucked the girls into their beds, Emma's room decorated with books and art supplies, Sophie's an explosion of colors and stuffed animals. Samantha reflected on the journey that had brought them her. "Mommy," Sophie whispered as Samantha adjusted her blankets, "are you happy you came back to us every single day?" Samantha whispered back the same answer she'd given hundreds of times, but meant more deeply with each repetition. "Even when we're bad, especially when you're bad, that's when you need me most." In Emma's room, her older daughter, older by 12 minutes, as she frequently reminded everyone, had a different question. "Do you miss your old life before us?" Samantha sat on the edge of Emma's bed, considering the question with the honesty her perceptive daughter deserved. "I miss feeling important in boardrooms," she said finally. "But I'd rather be important to you and Sophie. I miss having my picture in magazines, but I'd rather see your artwork on our refrigerator. I miss making decisions that affected thousands of people, but I'd rather make pancakes that make 2 little girls smile." Emma nodded seriously. "So, you're happy?" "I'm complete," Samantha replied. "There's a difference." Later, sitting on the couch with David as they watched the late news, Samantha felt the profound peace that came from living a life aligned with her deepest values. The financial headlines scrolled past. Mergers and acquisitions, market fluctuations, corporate victories and defeats. And she felt no longing for that world. "Any regrets?" David asked as if reading her thoughts. "Just one," she said quietly, "that it took me so long to understand what really mattered." "But you figured it out." "We figured it out. All of us together." As they prepared for bed, Samantha caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back was different from the one who had sat in that Tesla 15 months ago. This woman had laugh lines and worry lines, hands that knew how to braid hair and heal scraped knees. This woman had found her way home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, school events to attend, work to balance, the endless negotiations of family life. But tonight, listening to the quiet sounds of her family sleeping safely around her, Samantha Cross knew she had finally become the person she was meant to be, not the most successful CEO in Manhattan. Simply and completely a mother who would never leave again.